The reason we do this virtual meet is to help small businesses, especially to hold on and grow actually in this time of all the challenges. There's two things which are very important in this critical time is investment slash funding. The other one is the sales.
The most critical call you'll have is your first call and then your last call. Your first call is because you and I are getting to know each other and we're introducing ourselves and we're figuring out if we want to work together. And our last call is because we're ultimately asking for the business. First of all, I want to start here. I want to start with talking about the tenets of sales. People buy from people who they trust in, have a good rapport with. And I think that's important to know. And I think it's important for you guys to think about that when we meet for the very first time, you're a little apprehensive, I'm a little apprehensive, we don't know each other that well. So it's really important to start that conversation in the right way. It's also super important to diagnose before we offer a prescription. Think about a doctor. A doctor would never prescribe, or hopefully not, without doing a diagnostics. A surgeon would never operate without doing a diagnostics. But oftentimes we find when we sell, when we're in sales, when we run a sales organization, we want to go quick to the demo. And what I'll tell you about your demo is your most important asset that you hold. It should be used as a proof point once you know enough. So you also, on every single call, should think about what is it that I want to get out of this call, and what is it that I want to get from my prospect out of the call, and always leave the conversation, whether it's an email exchange or it's a phone call, with what are our next steps, and asking for that and getting commitment of that. And then ultimately, and this is one of the most important ones, don't close before your decision maker is ready. If you try to close before somebody's ready, they haven't connected the dots of the value of what you're selling and how they might gain benefit from it. So you want to take your time to do that. And I think when we're new to sales, that's one of the most challenging things for us. So let's talk about what we do before we ever engage. First of all, I want you to start thinking about what is your offering. What does your product do? What makes it unique and different? What sets it apart from anybody else that might do something similar? And this is hard when you're new. It's thinking about the value that you offer and writing a value statement around it. It's thinking about the competitive nature of your product or service. And it's thinking about, when I talk to somebody, how will they push back? What kind of objections will they have? And if you can start documenting those kinds of things early on, you'll find that your engagements are much more effective and will result in better outcomes than if you don't do this. Another thing to think about is, what size company do I want to go after initially? Yes, there's a lot of revenue in a big company, but there's a lot of complexities to selling in big companies. There's a lot of decision makers. It's hard to get meetings with people in a big company versus a small. So you'll have to think about that as you're thinking through your offerings as well. So what I want you to think about for your product and service is, who is it that you want to target? Is your target a CEO? Is it a CFO? Is it a sales manager? So you'll think about that, and you'll want to think about what is the day-to-day life they have, what is their job, how complex is their job, and how does your solution help them either get more done, sell more and generate more revenue, or solve a problem for them. So think about those things as you're thinking about how you're going to engage with that person. How are you going to navigate around the organization? In sales, we teach people the value of top-down selling versus bottom-up selling. And what I mean by that is this. Probably for me and what I do, the safest person I could go to is a sales rep. It's easy for me to get a conversation with a sales rep, but a sales rep would never tell me what's wrong in the organization. So I would start with a sales VP. Taking the time to figure out who your buyer is so important. So Eric, you and I had a conversation the other day, and we were talking about your buyer. And it's interesting because you sell a unique product, but unlike a lot of different people, you have multiple buyers, just like I have multiple buyers, like everybody does. So tell me, where do you find the most effective conversations with the different buyers that you're trying to engage with?
Well, so one of the things I tried to do was figure out who was the easiest persona for a sale to purchase Daily Breath. Okay, And so I identified the mother of an asthmatic child as my ripest candidate to download Daily Breath and use it. And I used something called the 5 whys. So I'll just kind of start and explain kind of what my goal was, what the persona was, and then what were the questions I used to characterize how and why this person would buy my product. So my hairy audacious goal is ultimately to integrate checking Daily Breath into the morning routine of millions of people with respiratory conditions, okay? 79% of people with smartphones access their phones within 15 minutes of getting up, okay? In the case of a mother of an asthmatic, it's not just she's concerned about Tommy having difficulty. She's concerned that Tommy's going to have difficulty. Go to the nurse. The nurse is going to have to call her out of work, so she gets, lost work days and has to come to the school and take Tommy home. So the reason I brought this up in the context of Josie is again, from a standpoint of who your buyer is, these are 5 questions that you can ask about why your buyer is going to buy your value proposition. Josie, I hope that's kind of addresses what you wanted me to discuss.
That was fantastic, Eric. Thank you very much for that. In sales, when we teach a new sales rep how to approach a prospect, we do it very similar to what Eric did. We teach them, instead of the 5 why buys, we teach them the 3 why buys. We teach them why buy now, why buy from me. And if you can start thinking about that, then you can start thinking about, how do I start building out that profile like Eric just shared with you? It really helps him have consistency in his conversations, being very clear in his message and concise in his message. And it helped us all understand what he can do to solve a fundamental problem. So I think that was a great job that you did, Eric. Thank you for that.
Sure. You're welcome.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on for a second. So let's start talking about some of the things that we want to do before we reach out. So as I mentioned and what Eric just showed us is you want to be super clear in what you offer. I think one of the hardest things that we do when we first get on a call for the very first time is we ramble. We're all over the place. We don't know what to say because we're so nervous for that very first conversation that we have. And then we oftentimes hang up and say, oh man, that was really bad. But every single call is a learning opportunity, which makes it fantastic. In our new hire programs that we run, we do role plays. And what a role play is it's a practice. We like to record our role plays. I have a tool that I use with my clients to help them in evaluating sales calls, and it's nothing more than a role play. And the reason that's so fundamentally important is that when somebody else hears us ask questions, we hear it in a different way than we hear ourselves necessarily. And so before you reach out, number one, find the people that you want to contact that have the possibility to buy your solutions. Have a reach out strategy. It often takes multiple times of reaching out to people before they'll engage in a conversation with us. It's funny, when I talk to people today, I often talk about how are you reaching out versus how I reach out. And I still hear people say I make a lot of phone calls, which is interesting to me because I don't make any. And the reason I don't make any is because when I get an unsolicited phone number coming across my phone, I know it's a sales call. And if I feel like talking to you, I may answer from time to time. That's a great way for me to find prospects, by the way. But most of the time I don't answer the call. I'm busy. It's in the middle of my day. You're interrupting something else that I'm doing, and I know it's a sales call. And so I don't answer them, and I don't think the majority of people answer. So that can be part of your strategy, but just think about, how often you're going to get positive results from the effort that you put in. And then, as I mentioned before, think through what you need to do to qualify people, what objections you may encounter in the initial conversations, and what is your goal of your first conversation as you're going along. Okay, so where do we find prospects? My favorite tool to find my prospects is LinkedIn. I've been an active LinkedIn member since LinkedIn first started. When we started using LinkedIn way back when, it was just a way for me to keep in touch with people that I had worked with in the past that had moved on. Today, I cannot tell you how invaluable the tool is for me, and we'll talk about how I use it in different techniques, but it's my number one favorite tool to use. I find so much information on LinkedIn. If you are not on LinkedIn now, I highly recommend, not only do you set up a profile, but you set up a professional profile. Make sure that your about your company, about you is well written, well articulated. Become a thought leader on LinkedIn around what you do. That's what I do. If you go and look at my activity, I'm pretty active in how I post on LinkedIn, the things I post, the comments that I make on other people's postings. I also like to have within my network people that are of influence. They can either influence other people in my network, which helps my network grow. They can influence me. They're somebody that's good for me to be doing business with in some way. So that's what I like to continue to have in my professional network. I think the number one lead prospect you can ever get comes from a referral. A referral because that means somebody believes in what you're doing and thinks they know somebody that may have a need for what you do. Treat these like they are super special. Make sure you reach out to that person as quickly as you can. Make sure you engage. But most importantly, I think it's super important to tie the loop back. And what I mean by that is this. Excuse me. I met Amu through an attorney that I was referred to through somebody else. And when Amu and I first spoke, I went back to Aaron and I thanked him for the referral. I told him what Amu and I were doing. I thanked him for thinking that it would be good for her and I to work together or have a professional relationship together. And he was thrilled by that. And the nice thing is that now he knows he did something good. But in the future, it would be really nice for me to refer him a professional connection as well. And that's what I mean by referrals. In order for you to build that network of referrals, they need to go both ways. Networking events, whether they're virtual events or they're in-person events, is a wonderful way for you to also find people that may be interested in what you do. And then we're not doing a whole lot of events today, but events are changing, and events are another super, super good source for finding the people that may want your product and service. Okay, so think about this as you're reaching out. On average, it takes 10 connections, 10 different types of connections in with somebody before they'll engage in a conversation. That's not always true. Sometimes I engage one time. You have a need. I hit you on the right day of the need, and we have a call. Most of the time, that isn't what happens. So I try all kinds of techniques that I use to try to find things that I think are relevant to you and important to you and tie back to what I do. One of the number one things I do is help sales leaders with their sales attrition. Sales attrition is one of the most costly things within a sales organization, and within technology, it can be a multi-million-dollar a year problem for sales leaders when they get it wrong. And so what I oftentimes do using LinkedIn is I look at how many people are attriting over a year, over 2 years. And I'll send a thoughtful note, not to the VP of sales, but to the CEO. And I'll tell the CEO about that problem and what I think it might be costing them. And then I'll ask them for a conversation. You would think when I send something like that, I would get an immediate, yes, let's talk. I don't. Oftentimes it takes multiple times. And so I have other things that I can send, either pieces of collateral or, a link to an article or a blog that I found that I thought might be relevant. And it isn't until the third, fourth, fifth time that somebody may then engage with me. Hey, Brandon, can I get you to come on for a minute and talk to us about some of the things that you do when you're trying to reach out to a prospective client of yours?
Sure. Just kind of reiterating a lot of what you said, I think the first and foremost, what's been most impactful for me is referrals. So really nurturing the relationships I do have and having those relationships, reference me. That's been the most beneficial source for leads. The next tactic I use is I'll go door to door. So fortunately for me, my clients, I can walk in the door and speak to someone. It might not be the stakeholder, but I can speak to someone. And usually it's a front desk person, or it's a leasing consultant, who I can kind of, give them my spiel, and, 9 times out of 10, I could walk away with a card. And just having that card is a gateway for me to source other information. So if I have an email address, I know I can go to LinkedIn, find that person, and I know at least the email combination where I could directly reach out to that person. Another thing I do is sometimes if I can't go door to door, I will cold call, but what I do is I like to present an idea that's almost too good to be true, and sell a concept in like, hey, I'm doing this event with so and so. We love to, we think your property would be a good fit. Is there someone who I can speak to, or is there a contact address where I could reach out to that person? And 9 times out of 10, I end up with a contact info. And another thing with that too is that this has all been able to allow me to build up a database of contacts throughout the area. So once I have that information, then I have a profile I'll put together of that property and who all the contacts are. So then I can add them into my email list, and I can directly reach out to them. And lastly, if I'm, just to kind of get resourceful, is if I can't find the email, or I can find that person on LinkedIn, I sometimes will go to Rocket Reach, which is they kind of collect various email addresses from different companies, and I'm able to, what I'll do is I'll find like what the combinations are, and I'll find the person who I want to talk to on LinkedIn, and I'll send out an email to several different combinations of an email address, and that way, not all of them hit, but one of them will. And if that works, then I get through. And I've actually made a couple of solid leads that way as well. So, yeah, those are some of my tactics.
I love it, Brandon. Thank you for sharing. It's great to know that the art of the door-to-door salesman is not dead. So that was pretty cool that you still do that. So have you ever gotten a LinkedIn invitation and somebody just sends you just a generic invite, and you look at the person and you look at their title and you think, why is this person reaching out? One of the first things that I do when I get an LinkedIn invitation is I go to my own personal profile and I look to see if the person looked me up. Before I have a call with anybody, I go to their profile and look them up. Before I reach out to you in any way, I look you up on LinkedIn. I'm trying to find out what we have in common. Did we go to the same school? Did we grow up in the same area? Did we work at the same company together? I'm very fortunate that I spent a number of years at Oracle. It seems like everybody in the technology industry did. And it's a good connection for me to say, hey, you and I worked at Oracle together. And it makes for a softer opening when I reach out to somebody. I look at who do you know that I know, because that first connection is a way for me to potentially get into your account. If I know the person well, I can reach out to them and say, hey, Joe, could you introduce me to your boss? And what I'll do is I'll have a conversation with Joe first. I'll learn a little bit about what's going on, and then I'll ask for the referral. That's one of the other ways that I use LinkedIn. So I think LinkedIn, and you'll hear me talk about it often, it's a wonderful, wonderful sales tool to use, but there's a lot of different ways to use it. So when I gather these nuggets of information about you, I write them down. I have them in front of me when I get on a call with you. And one of the first things that I'll do if I don't know the person well is I'll say, hey, Brandon, it's so cool. You and I both have a lot of connections in common. We might have 40 connections in common, or 50. And I might pull a few people out of it and say, hey, I know these people pretty well. How do you know them? Oftentimes, Brandon might come back and say to me, I don't know them at all, because he just accepted the invitation. But sometimes I get somebody that knows somebody that I know, and it's a wonderful soft reference for me. So consider using LinkedIn in that way, if you will. Or you could do what Brandon's doing and be the door-to-door salesperson. Some of the other things that I do with LinkedIn is I start a connection request this way. I send you an invitation to invite to come join my network, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why, what I have in common with you, and why I think it might be good for me to be part of your network and you to be part of mine. When you accept my invitation to connect, I then send you a thoughtful note back. and I tell you, hey, thanks for joining my network. I'll tell you if I'm reaching out to try to sell you something, I'll tell you why I reached out, and I'll send you a thoughtful note and say, would you be open to an introductory call with me? And I'll get a yes or I'll get a no, or sometimes I get no response. That's the beginning of my campaign to continue to reach out to you. I then put you into my database, and I put a note in the database to say, hey, follow back up with Eric in a week, because in case he hasn't reached out to me. And then I get that reminder in my inbox in a week, and then I can reach out with the next thing and the next thing and the next thing until you connect. And the rule of 10 is this. It takes 10 connections on average to start a conversation, but by the 10th, you also know that the person probably doesn't have interest in talking with you today. So then you probably would archive them for 3 months, for 6 months, and try the campaign again. So Brandon's suggestion of having the database is so valuable for you, because that's how you'll build a list of prospects to continue to work until you get them at the moment of need. So think about the ways you're going to store the information on your prospects, the notes you're going to take on a call, and how you gather that information together. There's a lot of free tools that you can use. I actually use a free one myself. I use HubSpot. Their CRM is free for any small business owner, and I get huge value out of it. And so, someday I may go to the paid subscription, but I don't find need today to do that. So if you're not using one, that's the one that I use. I wanted to go back to the pitches that we did last weekend, because I want to tie them together. I want to tie the pitch that you do and all the different ways you use that pitch in your sales opportunities. If you take the time to really define who you are, what you do, what your offering is, what problem are you solving for your prospective customers, how you're unique and different, and what is your call to action when you do your reach out, you'll use this pitch all the time. You'll use it when you introduce yourself in a networking event. You'll use it when you're trying to go after funding. You'll use it when you engage in a sales conversation. Whether it's an introduction to get a meeting, it's the start of the meeting. There's so many ways you use this pitch. What I would recommend is practice it, practice it, practice it. Practice it. And Lou says that you guys do that an awful lot. And there's a reason you do it. You do it because the more you do it, the better you get. So that's my recommendation on your pitch. When you are getting ready to do your first call, and this is what we teach our new sales reps, is script your conversations. What I do is I write on a piece of paper like the different things I want to talk to you about, the different things I want to explore. I have it in front of me. It helps center you. It helps you so you don't ramble. It helps you so you don't go off point. But more importantly, it helps you gather your information that you need. A technique that we teach our young sales reps is something that we call directional questioning. And what I mean by that is, if I am exploring with you what is the cause of your high turnover, I don't want to just ask one question. I want to ask many, many, many questions. I want to ask enough questions that you realize it's a problem. Because if I just jump to the next thing, we haven't connected those dots yet. So I may ask you to tell me, what is the percentage of attrition? What do you think is causing it? Do you think you're hiring the wrong kinds of people? What's on average, how long do they stay in your organization before they're leaving? Is it voluntary attrition, or are you having to performance manage them out? So those are some examples of questions that I'll ask, and those are layering questions, directional questionings to get all the information I want. I cannot stress it enough. First calls are not for demos. Do not lead with your product demo. Everybody does. I haven't figured out if I even need your product yet, and you're pitching it to me. I see nothing wrong with doing a quick 5-minute video or a demo, but I'll tell you a better technique and tip that I would give you is save your 5-minute overview demo as a follow-up and send it to me in a link with thank you message. Re-articulate our conversation, bring out the points of your solution that tie into our conversation and would help them understand the why buy you, and use that as a way to get your next conversation with them. First calls are all about you and I getting to know each other. It's not about selling me something. It is very rare that you will actually close a deal in the first call. It usually takes us many, many conversations to do that over time. And so use it as a way for us to just get to know each other, what you do, some of the challenges and opportunities you might be able to help them with, and then get to know them as well. So the rule of thumb is this. We've got one mouth and two ears. Ask questions, open-ended questions, and then stop and listen. And if you pause before you ask the next question, what you will find is your prospects will probably tell you more and more and more. Keep your first call to 30 minutes. You want it short, you want it concise, and then you want to ask for the next meeting. Okay, what do I do after my calls? What I do after my calls is I always send a very thoughtful follow-up. I recap the call. I include any kind of collateral that supports the conversation. I restate the next steps that we agreed to on the call, because I never end a call without asking for the next step. And the next step for me may be a conversation that we're going to have in a week. It may be something more specific. You may have asked me to go and talk to somebody else within your organization. So not only will I say this is what my plan is going to be, but then after I do that, I follow back up with a follow-up. And that's how we keep our communication short. I love including thoughtful information, whether it's mine or it's a partner's or somebody else, to help you know that I'm a thought leader in your area, to help educate you. That's one of the things that I try to do, because I think it's a really great way of building rapport with somebody. Okay, so I hope that this session was valuable for you and you got a lot of good tips and tricks out of the session. If I was teaching this in an onboarding program, I would teach this, and then I would go through many, many other classes with my young sales team members to teach them how to have an effective sales call. And remember, I don't think you can practice enough. So practice, practice, practice until you get your pitch down, until you get comfortable with a sales conversation. Moo, I will turn it back over to you. Thank you for the opportunity to share some tips and tricks with everyone today.
This topic is like super important, right? Sales in startups. I almost think that, instead of being a startup CEO in the beginning, you should be a startup CSO, Chief Sales Officer, right? And it's like super important. I remember having a conversation with a founder a little while ago, and he's there like, being a pre-revenue startup in the region, you're kind of treated like a leper. Nobody takes you seriously, right? And really, once you do kind of tackle doing the sales in a startup, a lot of the other things become a little bit easier. And
that was a great presentation. I'm a huge advocate of sales for either people identify as startup or they identify as an entrepreneur, however they want to identify them. Like, businesses make money at the end of the day. They have a mission. My little saying is, money isn't the mission, but it makes the mission possible. So if you're trying to do something, it's what enables us to do it. But for startups, it's like so far down the road. It puts so many obstacles. What are some key strategies that you can give people to make sales of some flavor, like tomorrow or next week, even if their product, like Eric's product, is taken a while? So it's like, how can we start engaging people, getting advocates, and maybe revenue early?
I love it when I hear somebody say to me, I'm not in sales. And I think, well, sure you are. Because everybody is in sales. Everybody. It doesn't matter what your job is. If you think about it, when we were children, we used to ask for, an extra dessert or an allowance raise or something, and that was you selling yourself. And when we get to be an adult, we do that in the business world as well. We either are selling a relationship we want to have with somebody. That would be something you're going to have to do early in your journey as an entrepreneur. What are the right connections that you want to make? The people that can help you with either thought leadership or money, if you need money to grow your company. Eric's having to do those things now. He's also having to reach out to people now to just run his idea by people and get advice and thoughts on the idea. Is it viable? Do you think I can make money at it? So it's interesting that even in times like this, we have to pivot, but even in good times, we have to pivot. And just know that about your business. I've had to do it a lot with my business as well. And sometimes what I do is I have a whiteboard and I put all my ideas on the whiteboard. and I explore the ones that are most viable for right now. It doesn't mean I forget about the other things. I'll come back to them at the right time. And it seems like the right time presents itself when it's ready.